Scheinberg. CA reached out to grab a cup of coffee as she prepares for the 12th annual meeting. I'm going to grab that for her in just a second. It's definitely been an interesting and challenging time here in the square, especially for restaurants and retail businesses. But it's also been a time for creativity and perseverance, two things that we think really embody the culture of Kendall Square. For us, that's meant serving thousands of frontline workers meals, some new products like our SB Dunks, and now using our takeout and delivery platforms to take and match donations to support the Black Lives Matter movement. We look forward to seeing everyone in the square soon. Please be safe and be well. CA, I've got your coffee for you right here, and have a great meeting.
Eli, you are the best. Good morning, everyone. My name is CA Webb. I'm the president of the Kendall Square Association. Wow, I miss starting my mornings at Shybird. I miss having lunch at restaurants across Kendall with so many of you. This is a time when there is so much to miss. You know what? We're going to do something kind of silly. We're going to use the poll function in this morning's meeting to ask you what you're missing most about Kendall Square. I want to know, is it being surrounded by scientists? Is it the sea of construction workers that you see every morning on your way in to get your dunks? We want to hear about it. This is a fun function we're going to use during this morning's meeting, so go ahead and try it out and you'll see it pop up a couple more times during this morning. And it makes me really happy to see that the leading answer is seeing your colleagues. I could not agree more. So thanks for responding. And with that, let me just also remind you, we have on our website a full list of the Kendall restaurants and retailers that are open and information about what you can expect curbside from our favorite spots. They have been incredibly entrepreneurial and creative during this time, and we want to do everything we can to support them. All right, let's get down to business. We are so glad to have hundreds of you gathered this morning for our first ever virtual Kendall Square Association annual meeting. In this hour, we will hear from Harvard professor Danielle Allen about pandemic preparedness and get a frontline update from Cambridge Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui. We'll also thank our outgoing board chair, Sarah Gallup, and install our incoming board chair, Lee McGuire, as well as vote to elect the new KSA board of directors. And we'll do all of this in an hour, so you can get on with your day by 9 o'clock. To start off quickly, I want to touch on a couple of features of this Zoom webinar. If you have any technical difficulties at any point, I've got a whole team that's helping make this meeting go. So please just drop those in the Q&A that you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do everything we can to help you. Also, following Danielle's keynote, you'll have the opportunity to ask her some questions directly, and you can drop those in the Q&A function either during her talk or as soon as she finishes. Now, I want to give a very important shout out to this year's annual meeting sponsors: Bayer Pharmaceuticals, Biomed Realty, Bristol Myers Squibb, Cambridge Trust, MIT, Pfizer, Philips, and Third Rock Ventures. Thank you for powering forward our work at such a critical time. These companies are at the epicenter of global innovation. Together, we are working to solve some of the world's greatest challenges. You know, our job at the KSA is to enable the future by connecting the people changing the world. That's you. We do this work and steward and advance this innovation ecosystem by providing critical connectivity and information sharing, convening, and collective action, work that I'm very proud that we've become known for in transportation and other areas. We do this to shape the future that we all want to see. That's what we do in Kendall Square. In 2020, we've had to revamp our roadmap. We're reimagining the future of work. We're asking hard questions about racism and bias and how we need to rethink our systems and our practices to build more equitable organizations and cities. And of course, we're working to solve the global COVID-19 pandemic. Like all of you, over the last 3 months, we've had to evolve our point of view. We've learned new formats and techniques to enable this connectivity, and we've built new resources, new products to enable our community to continue to thrive. In the past 3 months, we've brought you all together for our Future of How We Work task force to collaborate and create solutions for our next normal. And even though we couldn't come together in May for our annual Kendall Square Challenge, our companies have continued to lead in giving back to this community. Later this morning, you'll hear about an exciting new program, more than a year in the making, that will give Kendall leaders the tools they need to be champions of change in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Speaking of champions of change, I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Gallup. Sarah Gallup is a founding board member of the Kendall Square Association and co-director of the Office for Government and Community Relations at MIT. Sarah has guided our board of directors these last 4 years and been an invaluable advisor for the organization's second decade. As a gesture of our gratitude, as she wraps up her board chairman service, we created a plaque that we sent to her yesterday. And I just want to read you the inscription since you can't see me hand it to her on stage. The plaque says, "With our greatest appreciation to Sarah Gallup for 4 years of dedicated service as chairperson of the Kendall Square Association. Thank you for your devoted leadership, which has helped steward and advance the most innovative square mile on the planet." Sarah, we're grateful for all of the time, energy, and expertise you've poured into the KSA. And we are so glad you're remaining on the board of directors and will continue to be a part of this community. Over to you.
Thank you, CA, for your kind words and your very nice introduction. And I love that plaque because you know that's my favorite phrase about the most innovative square mile on the planet. As CA said, today's the last day of my 4-year term as board chair at the Kendall Square Association. Along with several of my fellow founding board members, I've had the great fortune to watch the KSA come into its own over the last 11 years. The organization's evolution is an impressive story of coalition building, success, and impact. And there have been many proud moments for all of us, the KSA and the Kendall community. I'd like to share a few of my proud moments with you. The first is watching the KSA become the go-to resource and mover and shaker on transportation advocacy. The Boston Globe Spotlight team even used our phrase, "You can't find a cure for cancer while sitting in traffic," to introduce its series, Seeing Red. Another is the creation of the Kendall Square Challenge. This event ushered in a completely new way of experiencing Kendall while building community and supporting our local nonprofits. The energetic spirit of this day is unmatched by any other event in Cambridge, and somehow the weather is always beautiful, as you can see from these images. Another series of proud moments for me is the high caliber of annual meeting programming over the years. Tom Friedman on how to address complex global challenges, the Globe Spotlight team on race and racism, Jeremy Hyman's on how new power is reshaping politics and business, and of course today's speaker, Danielle Allen, on pandemic resilience, each catalyzing substantive dialogue and follow-up. Danielle, we're grateful for your timely participation today. Finally, a standout proud moment for me is something that actually happens every day, and that is the smart and hard work of CA Webb and the KSA team. This group, CA, along with Alana Westwater, Abby Phillips, Valentine Philpott, and Caroline Willander, pools its creative talents to make the KSA and the Kendall Square community the best that it can be. Nothing that we are talking about today would happen without these individuals, and I want to thank them for their cutting edge and impactful work. Since our 2019 annual meeting, we've been keeping up our usual brisk pace at the KSA, including introducing new kinds of programming, like Crescendo, which featured the amazing K2O Orchestra, and new ways of telling our story, like the Kendall Collective, which features the compelling people of Kendall and Cambridge, and many other initiatives. But there are two specific areas of focus from this past year that I'd like to call out. Last year, we launched our Transportation Advance initiative to pilot new transit opportunities. Thank you to the Advance partners for their energy and commitment in promoting alternative transportation solutions. The actual launch of the Advance pilots will now take place at a time when we can all safely gather. Then we'll have an opportunity to recraft the way we think about traffic, congestion, and our commuting patterns. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a central priority for the KSA and Kendall. Last year, we continued our DEI journey with a dedicated learning community of 17 leaders from across Kendall's industries. This series of community conversations centered on the presence and impacts of racism in the workplace. I want to thank that cohort of individuals for its deep dive on this critical and complex topic. In 2020, the KSA is taking its DEI commitment to the next level with new community programming and dialogue that you'll be hearing more about today. For the KSA, this also means that we'll be doing the hard work internally, prioritizing bringing diverse voices to our team and board of directors. We currently have 4 seats open on our board, and I'd like to use this moment to share with everyone here an open call for nominations of leaders of color in particular who are interested in stewarding our shared innovation ecosystem. Now it's time for our board election, a moment for us to acknowledge the incredible people who provide leadership and guidance to the Kendall Square Association. First, please join me in saying thank you to 3 board members who are stepping down this year, Robert, Martin, and Johannes. We are grateful for your thoughtful and dedicated service to the KSA. Thank you. Now I'm thrilled to introduce our 3 new proposed board members. Eileen Elliott, Site Lead at Pfizer. Lisa Gerard, Director of Strategic Communications at the Whitehead Institute. And Maggie O'Toole, Chief Operating Officer at Lab Central. And these are the board members who have agreed to renew their terms for the next 3 years. I'll let you read the names. And finally, here's a complete list of the KSA's proposed 2020 Board of Directors. You can see that the organization is very fortunate to have such a strong board representing all sectors of Kendall Square. The last item of our election is the announcement of the KSA's proposed new officers. Lee McGuire as president, Caleb Hurst-Hiller as treasurer, Michael Owu as secretary. So let's get into the voting. Please respond to the poll that's just been circulated to vote on our proposed slate of board members and officers. I'm watching the vote, it's very fun. Thank you all for your vote and a very warm welcome to our new leaders. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our mayor, Mayor Sumbul Siddiqui. Mayor Siddiqui immigrated to the United States with her family from Pakistan at the age of 2. She was raised in Cambridge Affordable Housing at Ringe Towers and Roosevelt Towers and attended Cambridge Public Schools, graduating from Cambridge Ringe and Latin. She went on to attend Brown University and Northwestern University and used her public policy and law degrees to provide legal aid in the communities of Lawrence, Lynn, and Lowell. Today, Mayor Siddiqui draws on her experiences and expertise to advocate on behalf of the city's most vulnerable people. She fights for racial justice, affordable housing, employment opportunity, equitable access to education, vibrant retail, and many other community-strengthening policy matters. No one could have predicted that the mayor would also have to lead our community through a global pandemic and a racially charged time in our nation's history. But she is doing just that with compassion, calm, poise, and a lot of very hard on-the-ground work. Mayor Siddiqui, we are grateful for your leadership and your example, and are so glad that you are with us today. Mayor Siddiqui.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to have you as a partner in all this work. As I have done it, it's been so important. So thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with the Kendall community today. Right now, as a community, we're facing two pandemics simultaneously: COVID-19 and systematic racism. And it's heartening to know that our Kendall community is comprised of scientists and companies tackling the former pandemic by working on vaccines and treatments. And we as a community have to tackle and are tackling the latter pandemic together. There's a lot of work to do around racial equality in Cambridge, and the city needs your help to get there. So I'm going to start with COVID-19 and the response from the Kendall Square community. There's so many Cambridge residents and companies who've contributed to the city's Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund, which goes directly into the hands of our residents and small businesses here in Cambridge. The fund launched March 19th, and to date, we've raised over $4 million and have dispersed over $3 million to residents and small businesses. And small businesses have applied for these funds for up to $10,000, and these grants do not need to be paid back and can help businesses get back on their feet. I really want to take a moment to thank the donors, the tremendous support that's directly come from the Kendall community. We have Takeda, Novartis, Biogen, Amgen, Cambridge Side Partners, Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, and MIT, who've just been with us since day one. So really want to thank our partners and our donors there for getting this fund, which most communities aren't able to have up and running and very strong. So really from the bottom of my heart, and from so many residents who've just said thank you, that this has helped them tremendously. It has gone such a long way. The Broad Institute has been such an instrumental partner as we combat COVID-19. They launched a pilot program in partnership with our Cambridge Public Health Department and Pro EMS ambulance service to conduct COVID-19 testing of all residents and staff members at our 7 skilled nursing facilities and assisted living facilities. This program started April 9th. And in the first 4 days of the pilot program, about 1,000 people were tested, with 200 of those tests being positive for COVID-19. And prior to that, the city had only known about 24 cases. So this program has served as a true model for other sites across the Commonwealth, and has been the first step in how the city has navigated our testing capabilities. It's helped us Broad Institute has helped us conduct COVID testing for residents and staff at our homeless shelters, using the same rapid testing surveillance methods used at the nursing facilities. We've also been able to provide mobile testing sites in the port right nearby. And today we start a mobile testing site in North Cambridge. And we go to the community centers, right? We want our most vulnerable to be tested. And so now we've actually tested over 12,000 individuals over the last couple of months. And our mobile outreach activities account for about 40% of that volume. And based on many of the surrounding cities, we have done more testing than most. And so that's really, really important. And so the Broad Institute has been a tremendous partner. They've allowed us to create this access for those who are at the greatest risk of in our community, and have enabled us to respond quickly and effectively to the needs of our community. So another thank you to the Broad Institute. So while the past 3 months have been challenging, complicated, heartbreaking, we've also witnessed so much generosity, shared sacrifice, and countless reasons for hope. And it's been so important to come together during these times to support our residents in need. And I know one of the most wonderful things that you all do is engage folks in Kendall Square's Challenge Day of Giving. And while I was just disappointed that I couldn't join you in competing in challenges for our nonprofit community, your contributions supported programs such as De Novo. And as a former legal aid attorney, I especially thank you for supporting legal aid, and also our amazing Cambridge Arts Center. It's truly just such an honor to see all that you do and all that the work that your companies do. It's an honor to work with such inspirational and collaborative organizations like you all. And as someone who's grown up here, it is truly amazing to see what Kendall has become. I do remember it being an area that was just parking lots, and now it's become something else. And I think one of the most beautiful things about our city is also the diversity and the many businesses that call Cambridge home. We have about 110,000 residents, and with our racial diversity increasing each year. But as many of us know, the divide is increasing every year. For those who've grew up here and are lower income versus those who've moved here for educational or professional opportunities. And my goal as mayor is to ensure that everyone has equal access to housing, healthcare, food, and educational opportunities. But it is a balancing act of those issues. And it's always been difficult because the cost of living here continues to rise in Cambridge. And these issues have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic's had a huge impact on our restaurant and retail communities. But the KSA has helped in making sure these local businesses are supported, whether it's through social media campaigns or ordering online, and other ways to continue supporting the businesses we cherish. With that said, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and the city really has to be there with you. And we're going to continue to also ask your support in supporting these businesses as we move forward and enter phase 2 of the governor's reopening Massachusetts plan. So there's a long, long road ahead. And I know that Kendall community can always use your help in different ways. In the future, I think as we can gather and do more things in person, there'll be more opportunities. In the meantime, I think I've been telling members of the community, you can do a few things. You can vote, fill out your census to give the federal government an understanding of how much money we need in our states and cities for the residents that live here. We still are accepting donations to the Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund. Our goal is to get to 5 million. These funds go directly to the hands of thousands of residents, and there's still a lot of need. We receive calls and emails every day. And so my goal is to really try to help as many people as possible, but that work is never ending. So your partnership is always appreciated there. So finally, I do want to circle back to the second pandemic I addressed earlier. We have to do more for our Black community. The current COVID-19 pandemic shows Black people have been disproportionately affected, with the latest data showing that Black individuals have died from the disease at almost 3 times the rate of white people. And Black people here in Cambridge have tested positive at almost 3 times the rate of white people, specifically, further showing racial disparities and inequities. And I think as leaders, we often invoke Black Lives Matter in the wake of a racist incident or a tragic death. But this isn't enough. It's not. It has to be part of our daily work. You know, when we say Black Lives Matter, we mean they matter in healthcare, in education, in our workplace. They matter in every facet of life. So my call to the Kendall community is this. We all have different tools we can access depending on our privilege and our experience, our expertise. But we have to call on you and to use these tools, right, to contribute to ensuring that Black lives do matter. We have to buy from Black restaurants and businesses, donate to causes elevating Black Lives Matter movement, and more importantly, is also doing the real critical DEI work that you've all started. You've hosted so many important community conversations on bias and systematic discrimination. This is now more important than ever. So I urge you to grapple and continue that work and make sure it's reflected in your companies, right? It's reflected in the work that you do every day. We have to look inside and out, from the top and down, and to see that this belief is truly reflected in our community, in our space. So I really do look forward to hearing more about the 2020 commitment. I look forward to doing this work with you together. It's been quite a challenging 2020, but 2020 is teaching us so much as well. And I think this is the year that I feel it. I think a lot of people feel it. As challenging as it's been, it has also brought tremendous opportunity to bring change and to do really critical work that we haven't been able to in the past. So thank you so much for having me today. Thank you to CA Webb. Thank you to her team. And I look forward to working with the Kendall community in the future. Thank you.
Mayor Siddiqui, we're grateful for your powerful remarks. Your words move us and motivate us to action. Thank you for being with us today. Now I am thrilled to introduce you to the KSA's new board chair, Lee McGuire. Lee is the Chief Communications Officer at the Broad Institute and has been an integral member of the KSA board and executive committee. Lee brings extensive expertise in marketing and communications and knows what is most important to our member companies and organizations. In short, Lee will be an awesome chair of the KSA board. Lee?
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that introduction. And as excited and honored as I am to be nominated as board chair, I want to take a moment to thank you for your 4 years in the role and for more than 10 years launching and building the KSA. Of course, Sarah led the search for CA, and she helped expand our mission and our impact, and all the while has kept us grounded in the fundamentals that make Kendall Square what it is. And that means keeping us connected to city leadership, as well as our neighbors and the academic institutions and one another. Sarah, there was not enough space in that plaque to fit it all in, but the one thing we wanted to make sure you know is that you lead with optimism. You've been quick to share credit and celebrate everybody else, but for the record, I really want to be clear that the KSA is what it is today because of your leadership and your vision, your ability to bring people together, and the time you have spent on this organization and in our community. So I'm really glad that you're staying with us on the board because we're going to need you more this year than ever before. So let me add to the thank yous for you and to CA and the KSA staff, the whole board, including the new ones. And hopefully there's a couple of people out there today who are listening who would like to join the board according to Sarah's call as well. We really need as many voices at the table as we possibly can have. I also want to thank the mayor for joining us today. She and the entire team in the city of Cambridge have been out front, have truly been leading around both pandemics as she described them. We're very fortunate to have strong leadership in the city that believes in science, that invests in equity, and I hope that you will all consider contributing to the city's disaster relief fund. As for me, I grew up just outside of the city of Boston in Newton, and my husband and I both work in Kendall Square. Colin is over at Decatur, which kind of is on the line of Central Square and Kendall Square. We call it Kendall Square. I'm at Broad, of course, and I've lived all over the country in Texas, Missouri, Idaho, and here in Boston, working in journalism and government before I joined the folks here at Kendall Square. What's amazing about this community is its ability to punch so far above its weight. There's really nothing like it anywhere else in the entire world. And this year, the world needs Kendall Square more than ever before. Kendall Square, of course, though, is both a place and an idea. And right now, the idea of Kendall Square is very strong, but it's hard to establish that sense of place because most of us are working remotely. We're finding ourselves connected via Zoom boxes lately. And that's what the KSA is here to help steward this year more than ever. We create proximity, even when physical distancing is necessary. KSA can harness our connections to create new opportunities. And as the mayor said, doing this well means creating new networks that include everybody from many perspectives, thinking deeply about the inequities that drive disparities, and building new opportunities to welcome people who we might not know well, but whose experience and insight are invaluable. This pandemic is reinforcing and exacerbating those disparities that have always existed, which the KSA and all of you have been working to overcome and understand. I was going to say that work is more important now than ever, but it actually has always been important, and we all need to do a lot more. So as many of our leaders have said to us this month, becoming actively anti-racist has to be a top priority always. It cannot be the second priority. It cannot wait till things slow down because they will not. And we know that the Kendall community, more than most, has the ability to take on these big challenges and succeed. From a global health perspective, this is playing out in real time all around us right now. There are remarkable stories coming from Kendall Square as we seek to overcome and understand COVID-19. In March, Moderna came out as an early frontrunner in the race for a vaccine and has now entered phase 2 of human trials, which phase 3 is not far away. Last month, Pfizer dosed its first batch of humans for clinical trials in Baltimore, and they continue to fast-track vaccine development with the support of the FDA. Biogen and Takeda combined have given more than $12 million to the city of Cambridge to support those most impacted by COVID-19. Here at Broad, we partner with the state to process more than 4,000 tests per day for both Massachusetts and around New England. We've built up our capacity, so we're now ready to process up to 35,000 tests a day here at Broad, partnering with the city of Cambridge and the state to prioritize testing for the most vulnerable communities. Now, this is a moment where we're learning real time those lessons while working to solve critical issues. At True to Form, Massachusetts is leading. We're seeing innovation and coordination and cooperation in state and private partnerships during this pandemic. These vital partnerships have forged a path that other states can now learn from. From test processing to philanthropic pledges and open source data, our community is setting the next normal for how the country will respond to future pandemic challenges. And we're also not going to miss this moment to make permanent change. This is a time for working more collaboratively and for closing diversity, equity, and inclusion gaps, certainly not for letting old precedences drive our current circumstance. And KSA, of course, continues to strengthen member voices this year. Beyond critical advances on transportation, we have convened our Future of Work Task Force. This is a group of leaders from across Kendall's tech and life science industries who are designing the future of how we will work. Task Force members connect with peers over a series of virtual conversations where they are exploring challenges and uncovering opportunities for how to safely return to Kendall. KSA continues to connect our community to uncover opportunities to move the needle together. I'm also proud to announce that this year, KSA will launch a program that's now more than about 12 months months in the making. It's called Inclusion Drives Innovation. Inclusion Drives Innovation will build on the work of our diversity, equity, and inclusion learning community. We're creating a forum for sharing scalable best practices for a more inclusive workplace. In this program, which is facilitated by She Geeks Out, participants will deepen their knowledge, expand their network, and access tools to measure their organization's DEI practices. Of course, this is a critical time. We must come together to ensure we lead the world in building the most diverse, inclusive, and talented workforce we possibly can. I'm really grateful to the members of the host committee who are leading this program, including Broad, Cambridge Redevelopment Authority, CIC, DivCo West, Draper Labs, Ipsen, Jacobs, Microsoft, the Timco, and Turner Construction. Now we'd like your help. It is the only way this is going to have impact at scale. So please take a second to respond to the poll that's about to pop up, which is popping up in front of my screen, to let us know if you'd like to get involved in this program. There's the poll. This is the advantage, by the way, of doing this via Zoom. We can get you right now. Please take a second to let us know if you'd be interested in learning more about our Inclusion Drives Innovation programming. Thank you to the 55 and up people so far. This is very cool. Of course, Kendall's innovation comes from her curiosity. Right now, all of us are beginners again as we reimagine our future. So as we often do here in Kendall Square, we're trying to get smarter on the topic of how to return to work and school and life safely. A lot of people in the country are working on this right now, and one of the nation's leading voices is right here in our backyard. She has been an enormous help to us here at Broad, and her recommendations are being picked up and put into place all over the country, which is good news for everybody. We are so grateful that she has agreed to join us this morning, so I am thrilled to welcome Harvard professor and political theorist Daniel Ellen for a lecture on pandemic resilience, getting it done.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Lee, for those inspiring words. Thank you, Mayor Siddiqui, as well, for words of inspiration. You have both said such important things. Mayor Siddiqui, you've pointed to the importance of all of us recognizing that solidarity, inclusion, equity are fundamental to the success of our community and our country. We're fortunate to live in a free society, a constitutional democracy, and effective governance in such a context depends on solidarity. It depends on the mutual commitment of everybody in our country to one another. I think cracks in our foundations for solidarity are a big part of the story of the weakness we've experienced in responding to the pandemic. So redressing failures of solidarity is actually fundamental even to response to the pandemic. So our two pandemics are interactive in so many ways. I'm grateful for the chance to talk more about pandemic resilience with all of you in Kendall Square today. I come as your neighbor from East Cambridge, so everything that you do matters to me in so many fronts. And you are leading the world, as Lee said. That's the important point I wanted to build on from Lee's remarks. In addition to leading the world, you have the capacity to transform this country's infrastructure for pandemic resilience. That's what I want to speak about now. You've already done so much good work. We're all in the excited phase of the beginning of reopening. There's also trepidation as we try to figure out what that means for specific business practices and for our communities. But there's still another really big piece of work that we need to do collectively together. And that's what I'd like to speak to you about today. I'm going to share my screen to share a few slides with you. I'm very aware that all of you are anticipating getting back to your work come 9 o'clock. So don't worry, I'm with you on that hard stop. So here we go. Let's see. Can you all see those slides? Yeah, it's working. Okay. So we have mitigated COVID, and we've seen declining numbers in Massachusetts. We've seen declining numbers in other parts of the country. But mitigating COVID is not enough. I'd like to help us elevate our ambition. Let's build on strength by focusing on getting all the way to green, full suppression of the disease. We all know the basic story of what COVID has done. We have unemployment rates that have arrived at a speed unparalleled since the Great Depression. We have more than 100,000 people dead already. We have impactful negative first quarter for our GDP. Our experience has been different from other countries. Taiwan and New Zealand, for example, were both able to suppress the disease rapidly. Taiwan saw growth of 1.5% GDP growth in the first quarter of this year. Our curve, of course, masks a great variety of trends across the country. Places that are accelerating and decelerating are combined into our picture of a plateau. But it's worth recognizing that we really are, despite our success so far, in a different place from countries that have already achieved suppression or are close to achieving suppression. We have slowed the disease down, we have cracked community spread, but we haven't gotten back to a place of near zero prevalence. What is near zero prevalence exactly? The goal in the green zone, the bottom of the screen there, should be that fewer than 10 out of every 100,000 people are COVID positive. Why does this matter? It's when you're back to close to zero prevalence that you can truly re-engage schools, re-engage mass gatherings, re-engage the entertainment services industry. That's the space and place in which the economy can be open and stably open. In other words, every business in our community is striving so hard to figure out how to operate safely in a context of moderate prevalence, in a context where, as in that yellow band, there's still somewhere between 10 and 99 out of every 100,000 people who have COVID. But for every business, that job would be much, much easier if our entire community and entire country were in the green zone. That means that even as we continue to think about our individual contributions, we also have to ask that question of solidarity. What is it that as a society we can do together to get back to green? So there is something we can do. And the importance of it, I think, is driven home when one looks at recent data. So this is a map from the end of May, indicating that about half the country at the end of May was estimated still to have an R above 1, or even actually have increasing Rs. So the question of where we are in our country really does depend on the whole picture. Travel, for example, will be immensely complicated when half the country continues to see community spread or growth in an epidemic, even if another half of the country is decelerating. So you already know part of the story. In every state, we need implementation of a testing, tracing, and supported isolation program. Mayor Siddiqui was speaking about that. The Broad has done phenomenal work in supporting a real ramp up of testing in this community. Partners in Health has really supported contact tracing throughout Massachusetts. Massachusetts has set a standard in terms of combining contact tracing and testing and data management to control COVID. So that boots on the ground work, however, requires support from an arsenal of tests. This arsenal of tests has been building over time. As Lee said, the Broad, for example, has done incredible work ramping up its capacity to do PCR testing. But that arsenal of tests that we need is an arsenal that we are best to think of actually along military analogies in a regional way. Here is a reference to the Springfield Armory in the Revolutionary War. General Honore, who led the Katrina response, remarks that leaving states to buy their own tests during a pandemic is like leaving battalions to buy their own weaponry during a war. In other words, what we need to focus on is the possibility that building long-term pandemic resilience infrastructure requires thinking about testing in a regional way. This matters for Massachusetts because this state distinctively has the capacity to serve an entire region. Massachusetts is not alone in having that capacity. California also has standout capacity. The Northwest has some standout capacity, but there's a model to be established here for how, in the context of rapid response to a pandemic, one can activate lab capacity to serve an entire region. In some sense, what we have to think of ourselves as doing is transitioning from addressing a rapidly spreading infectious disease like this one with the infrastructure of, say, a system of country roads to the infrastructure of interstate highways. Before interstate highways were built, it would have been very hard for people to imagine the possibilities of travel between a place like, say, Chicago and New York. In other words, until that network was actually constructed, it was hard for people even to imagine the kinds of implementation possibilities that would come with having an interstate highway system. I think the same thing is true for thinking about regionally structured testing capacity. It's hard for us to imagine because we've been so focused on state labs, state public health labs, university labs serving their specific communities. But the regional picture is one that Congress can easily support by authorizing interstate procurement compacts. So Congress uses interstate compacts routinely. Emergency management through FEMA, for example, is handled through interstate compacts. The New Jersey, New York Port Authority is an interstate compact. What an interstate compact is a group of states that have been formalized by Congress to use powers delegated by Congress. In the instance of thinking about testing, the idea is that Congress can formalize existing regional collaborations and fund those compacts to procure testing. The goal here is to fully activate the testing market so that those labs with capacity can actually respond to bulk orders, can actually work in a context of guaranteed offtake contracts that make the supply of revenue certain in ways that justify an investment. The pandemic has had such shifting dynamics that it has the insecurity of revenue funds and flows has blocked in important ways the capacity of labs to pivot as fully as they might to supplying the testing that we need. So what I'd like to suggest is that Massachusetts could advocate for this kind of regional structure, help build the infrastructure that permits serving an entire region with the testing arsenal that it needs, while states continue to be responsible for the boots on the ground implementation of testing and contact tracing and diagnostics. If we could build that combined infrastructure, state level implementation, regional supply of testing capacity, we will have laid in the structure that we need in an ongoing way to keep this economy pandemic resilient, regardless of what kind of pathogen emerges in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, or 20 years. This kind of infrastructure, in other words, can help us now, can help us take our response now to the next level, get us all the way to green, not let us live in a land of moderate prevalence and mitigation, but also lay in what we need for the future. This kind of infrastructure also achieves safety for everybody, fully inclusive safety. From an equity point of view too, those who are most vulnerable are best off in context of near zero prevalence. In fact, the only way to provide sturdy security for the most vulnerable populations is to achieve near zero prevalence in our society as a whole. What's best for one is best for all, without any question in this context. Now, in order for this all to work, there's one other important thing. In addition to advocating for that combination of regional interstate compacts and for state work on implementation, there's also important public messaging work to do. As you just heard, the Broad has capacity to do more tests than it's doing. Why is it not doing more testing? Well, the message hasn't broken through to the general public yet that it is our civic duty, in effect, to get a test if we have a worry about exposure. Even if we have mild symptoms, it's our civic duty to get a test. The CDC produced great confusion in this area for several months advising that only the most symptomatic people be tested. That is still the message most people have internalized. So it's going to take a lot of work to reverse the understanding of what the role of testing and contact tracing are in helping us get back to green and achieve near zero prevalence. So while we were in the red zone, we all got very used to the messages about staying at home, that we needed to stay at home to flatten the curve, that we were helping, amongst other things, get PPE to the front lines, helping get ventilators to the front lines and keeping our healthcare system from being overwhelmed. So what are the messages now that we're in yellow? What will be the messages when we really truly get back to green? In yellow, we have to reinforce those messages about wearing a mask, taking that call from the contact tracer, embrace that call, know your status. If you are worried about exposure, get a test. Be ready to warn friends and neighbors about exposure. Why are we doing this? We all want to break the chain of transmission and get back to zero. To achieve this, we really have to enlist communities to support contact tracing. It can't really all be top down. Contact tracing has to come out of communities so that people are contacted by people who speak their language, who understand their cultural context, who have connections to them. We have to provide support for isolation for those who have to isolate. We have to activate all our labs. We still need more lab capacity despite the fact that we have tests that are going unused. And then again, in green, it'll still be so important for us constantly to be ready to know our status, to take the call, to get a test. And the reason we'll want to do that in green is to make sure that we can contain every spike and block a second wave. So even in green, we're going to have to keep contact tracing going, and we're going to have to work on building community health. The good news is that investing in community-based contact tracing is the seed of reinvestment in community health. And an infrastructure of community health across the country would go a long way to reversing the health inequities that we've seen as so impactful for individual communities. But it's also important to recognize that those health inequities have made us all vulnerable. As disease has spread in vulnerable communities, it has spread for all of us. So our vulnerability is completely connected in the context of a pandemic. And we have to recognize that full inclusion, a work to get to zero prevalence that rests on a commitment to solidarity and the good of all, does actually bring the best results for every individual, every business, every organization as well. Equity is in all of our interest without any question. So please share the message about regional procurement via interstate compacts for test capacity. Please share these messages with your community about individual action. Get that test if you have any concern about exposure, wear that mask, embrace the contact tracing, take the call. I welcome your questions. You've all done such good work in fighting this disease, and I'm so grateful to be your neighbor and to have had the chance to learn from you over these last few months.
Danielle, thank you so much. I told you when we spoke last week, and I feel it powerfully again, I feel so much more optimistic after I get to listen and learn from you. So thank you. I know that the other people here with us today are feeling that way. I want to remind all of our guests today, we have the Q&A function you can use. You can just click at the bottom of your screen to pose questions. And I'd like you to be able to ask Danielle directly when we have her expertise at the table with us. You can also upvote questions. So if you see a question that you would have asked and you're glad someone else did, just upvote that. So please jump in there. And I'll just start by saying, I love the collectivism in this. What's best for one is best for all. This is a world in which I want to live in every day, and that the KSA works to stimulate here in Kendall. Will you just speak to that a little bit more, and maybe some bright spots and what you're seeing, and where you would push us to be more aggressive?
So one of the country's most interesting bright spots is New Orleans, actually. You'll all remember when we were reading in the newspaper about a huge alarming spike of cases in New Orleans. And the city's public health office got on it, and they suppressed the disease. So in New Orleans specifically, the curve looks just like those curves in Taiwan, New Zealand, South Korea, and so forth. So, and they did that through the kind of smart testing that Mayor Siddiqui is also describing, where they took mobile testing spots to vulnerable communities. They also used data. They began to trace where people were coming in from zip codes for testing. And they found that there were parts of New Orleans where nobody was coming at all. So they took the testing there. And in that case, they didn't actually know those locations were hotspots when they went. They didn't know that they had communities of vulnerability there. But when they took those mobile testing hotspots, they found huge prevalence of COVID. So it's really important to use data and to recognize that you need to test even in places where you're not yet seeing a hotspot, because you may not be seeing it simply because people aren't coming in for the testing. So they turned things around, and that really is the model I'm trying to hold up for the country as a whole. Maybe one more point just about what's good for one is good for all. I sit here in higher ed. I'm watching the entire higher education landscape, sort of thousands of institutions scrambling, each trying to figure out its own plan for how to be safe. And it's a painful thing to watch, because the answer is so clear that they would all be able to function much better if they could function in a low prevalence environment. And it's the lack of any clarity about that for each of them that makes it so impossible for them to plan. The analogy to terrorism is apt. We would never expect every organization, every college or university to build its own plan for fighting terrorism. We would build a national umbrella of security and expect people to do marginally more work for security on their own behalf against the context of that broader picture of security. So the same thing is true with COVID. And I know we've already been fighting hard for several months. It can be a big ask to hear somebody say, okay, let's fight even harder. There's another step we have to take. We have to go higher, elevate our ambitions, but we still really do have to elevate our ambitions and aim for that near zero prevalence, which characterizes now Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, South Korea, Germany, to even is getting to that near zero prevalence place.
Well, with your leadership and the knowledge that we're spreading here today, I think we're taking another step forward. Let me ask a couple of questions that are in the Q&A. Lori Fitz asks, now that testing at places like CVS are available for in-state residents, will this change soon so that people can move between states and know their status?
So it's a great question, and the short answer is that yes, that can help a lot. And I think this actually connects to the question from Mr. Gacy as well about the Globe article about testing numbers dropping. The single biggest hindrance at the moment to testing is public understanding about who should get tested. And so that's where all of you as people who share messages with your employees and with the communities you serve could make such a huge difference. People need to know that if they have mild symptoms, go get a test. If they have any concern about exposure, go get a test. In other words, it's a bit like mask wearing. In the CDC, in the beginning, CDC told people not to wear masks. And then there had to be a lot of work to reverse people's understanding of what the purpose of masks was. We need the same thing with testing. The CDC said, only go in if you've got a lot of symptoms. It's only, for treatment and so forth. And so people don't understand actually that, yes, it's okay to go get a test. Yes, at this point, there are actually a couple of different ways of doing it. It doesn't have to be that nasal pharyngeal swab, which is so painful and uncomfortable. You can go to your urgent care and get a rapid test in a somewhat less difficult way. So at this point, just really spreading the message to go out there and get a test is the most important thing. And then yes, if we can drive up the numbers of people participating in testing, we will drive prevalence down yet further, and then we will be in a place where we can move safely between states with clarity about our own status and clarity about the status of the communities that we're moving between. That's the other key thing we have to know, not just our own personal status, but the prevalence status of the community we are in or hoping to go to.
Well, on that note, Danielle, thank you so much for being with us today. We are so fortunate to have you in this community. Thank you for sharing your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And guests, we are going to wrap up on time. I just, again, want to thank all of our speakers. 2020 has been such a different year than the one that any of us imagined, but we all continue rising to the challenge. You can depend on the Kendall Square Association to be here to enable your business to continue to thrive as you work through your reopening plans, as we all continue to be nimble and evolve. Please lean on us for information and support. Thank you again to all the leaders of this organization for being so civic-minded, for being the kind of leaders that Danielle just described that we really need in this time. And lastly, I just want to thank my team, Alana, Abby, Carolyn, Valentine, for all you've done to advance this organization this year and in delivering this first ever online annual meeting. It was flawless. So thank you, everybody. I loved sharing my morning with you, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.